What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde, and boy, do we have a special guest, Keith Ferrazzi is in the house. What's up, Keith?
Whoa, you talk faster than I did. That's impressive.
I always tell the audience, I'm like, better not put this at more than 1.0 speed or else you're screwed.
Totally,
good, man.
I'm excited to be here. And we've got some mutual friends. I've heard great things about you. Love your show. I'm pumped.
Oh, man, likewise. So, guys, I'm so pumped to have Keith here. I've been wanting to have Keith on the show now for a couple of years. I'm so glad it worked out with his, he's doing a book tour and we're going to book launch. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit in the show here. But so I was first introduced, I'm going to show for anyone watching the show, I was introduced to Keith. You're going to probably recognize his book. It's the #1 New York Times bestselling book, Never Eat Alone. I was introduced to this book by a good friend of mine who's been on the show before, Matthew Stewart, former global chairman of EO. And we're in forum one day and we're talking about books you got to read. And he's like, oh, you got to read Never Eat Alone. It's like how to like build that network of people that you want to connect with. And so I went out, got the book, and so right away you're on my radar from Matt. Matt's a guy that does not refer a lot of books. So that I knew it mattered when he said it. And then of course I saw that we were connected, to your point, through Vern Harnish, and yet that you've done work with Vern and his network. And I'm an old school Vern guy, growing up through EO and GOT and MIT, through Brilliant Giants. And so, yeah, man, you've been on the radar. You've been on my list. The audience knows that I have a list. I'm always working on my list. And so, man, this is a couple years in the making. But Keith, so grateful to have you here today, my friend.
My
Welcome
pleasure.
to
Darius. Send me the list, and if any of my buddies are on it, I'll be happy to help.
All right, I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So for listeners who have been living under a rock and maybe aren't as familiar with your work, I'm going to give a quick bio here. As I mentioned, Keith is the New York Times bestselling author of Never Eat Alone. Been featured in all the publications, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and then some. Former CMO of Deloitte Consulting and Starwood. I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit about that as we go into his origin story. And we're here to talk today about his newest book. It's coming out November 12th, Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship. So super excited to talk about all the greatness that you've created in the world, Keith. But if you wouldn't mind, here at the Greatness Machine, we love origin stories. Would love if you could kind of give us some of your origin story. How'd you get to where you got to?
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully it won't be too long. I'll try to do it in under a few minutes. Poor kid, immigrant family, Pittsburgh, blue collar, born during the period of time when Pittsburgh was crashing around us in the steel industry. And my old man was unemployed. My mom had to become a cleaning lady. And it was interesting. I had made a commitment that I was going to grow up someday, be governor of Pennsylvania, and fix manufacturing. Now, that was just the wishes of a silly kid. I actually did a pretty good job of going down that path. I ended up getting pretty close on the political spectrum. My mentor ended up getting indicted, who was a congressman at the time, but that's a fun story. Today, I'm still deeply focused on righting the wrongs of poor business management. Bottom line is, the reason the steel industry crashed is the arrogance of the steel industrialists. These individuals, unlike the Japanese, who were building Kaizen, recognizing that frontline workers could re-engineer work, rethinking their companies like as if it was a product itself, engineering the business. And today I see the same kind of lazy, lacking curiosity. I see us falling back into old ways of work prior to pandemic, old ways of working. And the reality is the world is much too volatile. The world is changing way too fast for us to keep using old ways of working. So I have a research institute for 20 years focused on the reinvention of work, the elevation of humans to crush it in terms of results. Now, what happened in between the two is I applied some of these principles to myself when I was young. The principles of never eat alone in terms of career management and relationship management. And yeah, I became the youngest officer in the Fortune 500 at Deloitte and then over at Starwood Hotels. But I noticed that these two firms were very different. Deloitte was a band of brothers and sisters taking a hill together, gonna
Mm.
change the future of the business. And Starwood was a bunch of competitive silos. And while Barry, our founder, was brilliant and he was an innovator and he created the W Hotel, etc., we still ended up selling below our multiple because to Marriott, as people know the story, and it wasn't a successful exit. I mean, we did not crush it for shareholders, and it was absolutely because of the lack of a sense of teamship, a sense of individuals co-creating the future together. Instead, it was way too bogged down by silos, competition, politics. And then here's Deloitte, which is we were the lowest of the big eight at the time. And you look at us today, and that was our dream to be at par someday with, Accenture, McKinsey, and all the rest of them, which is what they've achieved. So after that, I started a company, a computer games company. We exited. I had some cash. And that's when I decided to start the Research Institute for 20 years, coaching executive teams.
That's amazing, man. So first of all, I didn't know this. We before the show, we realized we share some Italian blood, but my mom's from right outside Pittsburgh.
Oh,
So
shit. Where?
my grandma. So I'm going to take a step back. My grandmother was born right outside Pittsburgh. My grandfather was born, and she's full Italian. My grandfather was born in Italy, immigrated to the United States like right after World War II, moved like to Boston, then to right outside Pittsburgh in the Monongahela Valley in a city called Monessen.
I know Menneson well. My cousins live there. I grew up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, Greensburg area. I know Menneson well. In fact, I was just home. My mother, unfortunately, she's 91. She's doing okay, but she was in the hospital briefly. So I was over there, and I even visited my cousins who live in Menneson.
Oh my God. I guarantee you they know my family because it's a small town. So,
So
so
the
we
whole
got,
the whole area is very small. Yeah.
yeah, I got tons of cousins in like Bell Vernon and Monessen, that whole area. But anyway,
By the way, good
so,
people, good people in Pittsburgh.
oh, super good people. Yeah. It's salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Right. So anyhow, that's interesting that I'd love to dig into this. So this difference between those two firms, because like having had that experience and having like built a lot of, I'm an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. It sounds like you have a lot of background in entrepreneurism, obviously with building the Institute. And then prior to that with having a business that you obviously founded and sold. Um, when you start thinking about teamship, like what was the big difference that you sounds like you had a great leader at Starwood but didn't have the great outcome of a great team? Like what was the like catalyst for
Yeah.
that?
Let me do a quick diagnostic for everybody listening. We're all leaders. We all run businesses, myself still. I ask you the following question. A good leader gives feedback to the team. A great leader gets the team to comfortably give each other feedback. That's teamship. A good leader keeps the energy of the team strong. A great leader has a social contract where the team feels responsible for lifting up each other's energy. A good leader holds the team accountable. A great leader makes sure that the team holds each other accountable. The shift from teamship, the shift to teamship from leadership is a shift that will eliminate 30% of you running around playing whack-a-mole, of you being the hub and spoke of that team's success. What we dream of is our ability as leaders, particularly as entrepreneurs, to get out of the middle, and yet we're constantly putting ourselves right in the middle. So we need to be able to teach the team to step up and meet us in our leadership. And what the book has done is it's 20 years of research, coaching some of the fastest growth unicorns, coaching some of the best turnarounds in the Fortune 500, the General Motors team coming out of bankruptcy, so many others, and even governments now, coaching government turnarounds. Going on my way to Bhutan in a week to work with that government. And the whole point is when you start to look at the people around you as a team and realize that we're going to cross the finish line together. I came up with a word for it. I call it co-elevate, where a team is committed to a mission, but committed to pushing each other to get there.
So let me ask you a question. Like in building an environment where that happens, obviously there's a lot of opportunity for people to, I guess this comes down to like, is it a healthy team or not? But like people stepping on each other's toes, somebody like pissing someone else off, holding each other accountable in a way that maybe they don't want to be held accountable, or making some assumptions around like what they're doing towards the negative. How do you navigate that in a team environment? I mean, it sounds like you have to build trust as the foundation first, but
So
what? Yeah, I'd
yeah, I'll
love to
be
hear
more
that.
specific. And the reason that the book works so well is it's a roadmap for how to do this. The first thing you have to do is intellectually agree how the team should behave. Now, that's a big deal because most teams have very old minded ways of working. Now, the mindsets and the intellectual understanding is almost irrelevant, but you've got to start there. So we have 10 critical areas that a team needs to agree what is high performance. So one of them is we are responsible for keeping each other's energy strong. The other one is we challenge each other. We challenge each other when it's risky to do so, right? That's another one of the shifts. Now that shift of we challenge each other as peers. There's most teams don't do that. Most teams think that if they challenge each other, they're throwing each other under the bus. Well, in reality, you could flip that script and say we challenge each other because we absolutely won't let each other fail, right? So the key for us is first to understand what great looks like, even if we understand where we are. Now, we do a diagnostic, and the book has a diagnostic tool for each of these points. And the team gets to realize, you know what, on a spectrum of conflict avoidance to being courageously candid, most of us on 0 to 5 are at about a 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I know. 20 years of research, most teams are at about a 2 in terms of being courageous and challenging each other. So once you know that you're mediocre, once you know what you should do, now the next point is what's a new practice that I can try? So I'll give you one. We all do report outs. Everyone, somebody member of your team is going to stand up and run through a deck of 20 pages describing something. They're horrible. Let's turn report outs into stress testing. Stress testing is like a superfood for an extraordinary culture. Somebody gives a quick presentation and says, here's what I've been working on that's working, here's where I'm struggling, and here's where I'm going. And then the team turns to groups of 2, opens a Google Doc, and says, here's what you're missing, write it down. Here's an idea or an innovation that I want to offer you, and here's some support or help. That simple exercise has just assigned to the team the kind of culture that you dream of, a helpful culture that's offering support, a creative culture that's offering new ideas, a challenge culture, which is pushing back on somebody and telling them what they're missing or what risks they have. You've just created a, 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 a simple practice, which is an assignment of the culture that you want. So that's what we've done. We've observed high performing teams. I went and sat with Jeff Bezos' team when he was CEO. I've sat with some of the highest performing teams in business, observing their practices, documenting them, exporting them, applying them to 3,000 other teams to see whether it moves the needle. Once it does, it makes it to the book.
And so when we start looking at, like, again, tactically, that process, like, how do you introduce that to an organization? Because I would assume that's like, it probably feels overwhelming for organizations when they're trying to go from a 2 to a 5. Like, where do they start? How do you guys, like, how do you think about that? Or like, is this something that's done through consulting? Is it
Yeah, I
something
mean,
that's
look,
done through?
in the olden days, you'd have to hire our consulting firm. And we play at the very senior levels, and we're not cheap. And we really have the only ones that have cultivated this methodology. I have to admit, I've kept the methodology relatively private. I publish it in Harvard Business Review articles and snippets, but I'd never written a book because my team had me convinced, and I agreed, that we didn't want to give away our special sauce, what people paid hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars for. But I decided, no, it's at 58. It's more important to be mission driven. It's more important to define a space and own that space. I mean, the last book that everybody knows about high performing teams was Pat Lencioni. That was 20 years ago.
Right.
That's, the 5 dysfunctions. I wanted to create a roadmap and get it out into the world and really create and own that space for folks. So the principle of teamship is now available in the book. The way you get your team, you don't have to get the organization to get it. You just have to get one team. If you're the executive, the leader of the company, then buy it for you can certainly buy it for everybody in the company and cascade it. But if you get one team really working on all cylinders, it's extraordinary how much awake that team gets and then becomes evangelists for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like the next question is like when you start looking at, so let's say you have different, and like maybe this is more so in siloed cultures, but let's say you have a couple different leaders. One leader's running these best practices, another leader's maybe not, or they run maybe more of like a command and control structure.
Yeah.
What happens then when you start to see this like chasm between how leadership is between these groups?
So, one of the things that we teach teams to do is how they become change agents for the organization. So, there's one of the shifts is realizing that teams don't actually function in organization charts. Your org chart is irrelevant. If you've got a critical initiative, you're probably pulling people from multiple parts of the company to get it done. We need to recognize that being a leader of an initiative is being a leader of a team that may not even report into you. And once you start to realize that the teams you're a part of, not team that you lead, but teams you're a part of, are each individual teams that are made up of who needs to be there, that's a real important definition. Because if you've read this book and you end up being a leader of an initiative, you're starting to coach other parts of the organization in what our social contract is. So for instance, and you don't have to like get the people to pinky swear they're going to do anything different. If before a meeting that you were launching some critical initiative, if you were to send out a Google Doc and say, look, here's a critical initiative, you know what it's about. What are the three things that you observe we are going south on here? Send that out to everybody in advance where they can be thoughtful. People being thoughtful before a meeting and giving candid input, they're 85% higher likelihood of giving candor and having psychological safety. 85% higher. If they can do it in an exercise outside of a room. In the reality of a meeting of 12 people, 4 people think they're heard. When you send this stuff out in advance, 10 people think they're heard. So you can start to change the culture of a broad group of individuals through the adoption of a set of simple practices that are so easy that people just lean into them, not even knowing that that's what you're doing, which is changing the culture.
And so is this basically when you just, it sounds to me like you've hit this point in your career where it's around being purpose driven. And it's funny, I interviewed Marshall Goldsmith and he has the marshallgoldsmith.ai where he's basically like, hey, I'm not going to be here maybe 30 years from now, so I just want to give it all away for free. Obviously a book's not free, but is that really the ideology here? Is like, hey, I'm just putting it out there through this book. Was that the?
Yeah. I mean, there's a group called coach.com and they have thousands and thousands of coaches that do coaching, and they do mostly individual coaching, executive coaching. I like called up Alex, the founder of it, and I said, hey, listen, I'd like to come and teach all your coaches how to do what Ferrazzi Greenlight has been doing for years and making millions from. And they can have a formula right there in the book on how to do it themselves. That's fine. It's like, I want to elevate the space. I'm a part of Marshall's MG 100. Marshall's been an old buddy. I was a part of the first class of that. He's been an old buddy for many years. He's a great inspiration. I'm not going to wait until I'm in my 70s to start this. I'm starting now.
Yeah, I love that, man. So let me ask a question. I want to go back to, you came up in corporate, have these two different experiences, build your own business, sell it, and then decided to do a research institute. That seems like that's kind of out there. Like, tell us about why you made that decision.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I always just wanted to be purposeful. I wanted to make a difference on the planet. I thought maybe writing a book would be amazing. I thought that being a speaker would be cool. Being on television or whatever, radio, podcasts, all of that would be so amazing. I wanted to be someone, right? And once I had achieved a certain level of success, I started realizing that my ability to leave a footprint on this planet was going to be through the workplace. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a preacher. My dad said, "The hell you will." He's like, "Yeah, I didn't invest in having you get private school educations, and my parents couldn't afford anything. They got me full scholarships, but even the school uniform we couldn't afford." He said, "You're not going to go be a minister. You're going to go be a businessman and make some money." Um, so the ability to use the workplace, I joke that I've got the ability to elevate people's consciousness and capabilities 5 days a week. I don't have them just one. So I believe that this is mission driven. Changing the way the world works is important. I'll give you have you ever heard of Tony Hsieh from Zappos?
Yeah, yeah. He actually endorsed my book.
Great.
So yeah, I know him
So
very well.
Tony was one of my best friends. And when he died, I started an award. And this is it. It's the Tony Hsieh Award.
Oh,
The
that's
Tony
cool.
Hsieh Award, and you can go online to go to thetonyshiehaward.com, thetonyshiehaward.com. Um, and what it's rewarding are folks like your listeners who think of themselves as radical innovators doing cool shit, helping elevate productivity and people and ways of working. So we have hundreds and thousands of people participating in the award and sharing how they're changing their workplace. And so please have your folks go and apply. Um, this is what I believe in. I believe that we can change the world through the workplace. Right now I'm working with 60 heads of HR of major corporations like Walmart and others. And we're working as the election draws closer on how do we help employees be respectful in how they disagree with each other. When you have disagreements in the workplace, there's become a rash lack of civility in people's argumentation in the workplace, whether it's about your opinions of what's going on in the Middle East or in Ukraine or what's going on in politics. It is absolutely appropriate to disagree, but it's not appropriate to disagree with such disrespect as what we see in the workplace. And unfortunately, our politicians aren't teaching us any better. And so, what I thought about, I came up with an idea. I said, well, what if we have a bunch of companies of whom collectively we've got, maybe a 50, 60 million employees in these companies? What if we can teach them all how to respectfully disagree with each other? Imagine what that might trickle out and have an impact on society. So I think the workplace is a place to change society. I don't know that we're finding it in other places, to be honest.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had that perspective too. That I say it through entrepreneurship, but I actually think, to your point, it's the entire workplace. I just think entrepreneurs are creators, so they're going to kind of lead the charge, and then big business will be forced to follow suit. So yeah, I think you're right, because I think we've lost these institutions, like let's just walk through the former institutions that drove culture. Were what? Church, community,
Amen.
the town square,
Yep.
politics, right? Most of those are either diminished or in shambles right now. And so, but the one area where I think we can all agree is that business seems to have really become almost democratized. Like, you can start a company and a business with almost nothing. So I love that. And I think that you see a lot of leadership development there, maybe in the ways that weren't available 30, 40 years ago. What, when you start thinking of when you started the Institute, your first book, Never Eat Alone, like, how did that was it the Institute first, the book second, or the book
Yeah, no, that's
first
great.
in the
Thank you.
Institute? Which one?
No, so the book was an accident. I mean, you know, it was one of my greatest achievements, and it was an accident. Now, the work to create the content that was in the book, that wasn't an accident. That was a lot of hard work. That was, 30 years of busting my ass, learning the tricks of how do you get ahead in life when you start from behind, right? And the answer to that question is it's all relationships. I had no nepotism. I had nobody to open doors. And so I had to learn, how do you get people to open doors for you? And the answer at the end of the day was show up and be generous as hell, supporting other people's missions. And it's amazing when you show up with generosity and authenticity and build real relationships that are in service of other people, you have a red carpet laid out in front of you. And that's how I achieved. I mean, when I was at Deloitte, the CEO was aspirationally wanting to be at par with McKinsey and Anderson at the time, Accenture. And I heard him and I was like, you know what? We're at the lowest of the big eight. How in the world are we going to get number one? So I did a research paper. I was a summer intern at Deloitte. I did a research paper with my professor on the future of professional services marketing. I interviewed the the chief marketing officer of McKinsey, chief marketing officer of Accenture. I interviewed 8 CMOs, wrote up a white paper, sent it back to all of them, and sent it to the CEO of Deloitte and said, I hear you want to be number one. Here's a bunch of other people's path to get there. He was blown away. Nobody had ever done that kind of ambitious, driven, step to the front of the room kind of work. That was the beginning of me becoming a chief marketing officer of all of Deloitte in my late 20s, right? So the point of being radically generous to critical relationships opens doors. Then the next questions I started thinking about was, how do groups of people work most effectively together? And I looked at things like EO, I looked at YPO, I looked at AA programs, I looked at Weight Watchers, I looked at all these groups that seem to have some mechanism transforming people's lives. And I said, how do we translate that into business, into teams? And that began the work of developing the Research Institute. So the first book was accidental. Somebody came along and said, you've had a lot of success. You should write a book.
Right.
And I said, I don't have time. And they said, we'll give you $250,000. I said, I'll find time.
I love that. So when you've done, having done all this work for over 2 decades now, it's coming out in the book that you're putting out in November. What's when you look at different size businesses or different types of companies, and you look at, I'm a trained conscious capitalist. My belief is, and we're taught this through conscious capitalism, is that, as goes the leadership goes the organization,
Yeah.
and so when there's a quote a friend of mine we were talking about through EO, which is like, you get the organization you deserve, right? And so, but I think that when you ask most people, and I think you might get different answers. I think kind of when it comes down to it, people want the same thing. They want great business. They don't want a bunch of drama. They don't want headaches. How they get there, and it's usually the bottleneck's always at the top. Is CEO is ego driven. There's nepotism. There's all these bad behaviors that might become toxic through the organization, and then I think people react to it, and you end up getting the side effect of it, or the organization you deserve is not the one you want. So when you start looking at organizations like this, is like, how do you, I'm assuming the folks that want to work with a company like yourself are maybe not those types of organizations, but I got to assume, like when I've coached a lot of CEOs, and what I've found is I've never met a CEO that says that they have a bad culture, and I've never met a CEO that says I'm a terrible leader and I want to, I'm have play favoritism. There's always like a story they tell themselves as to why they're doing what they're doing that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
So look, what I think anybody listening to this, if you long for the following, if you long for your team to step up and for you to get some breathing room because your team is doing for itself some of the things that you used to run around frustratedly trying to push upon them, feedback, accountability, pushing innovation and creativity, et cetera. If you want your team to step up and meet you in leadership, this is the book for you. And I don't think there's any leader that I know of that doesn't want more of that. Even some of the greatest teams I know can get better. If you look at a scale of where teams are from low performing to what I call this model of teamship, there's only about 15% that are up at that right-hand corner. Um, the journey, of course, you've got teams like the team at Amazon that has a lot of cleanliness. I mean, what I love about Andy Jassy is he's so clean in his thinking. There's no personal agenda, there's no personal passion driving, obscuring his point of view. He's clean. And the whole team is clean, and they're focused on the mission, but they're also focused on making sure that the whole team gets there, not just one individual or individualized. So even a team, but in the same regard, I have to say they don't spend. I mean, I don't think a lot of organizations spend a lot of time being purposeful about owning each other's energy and resilience. That's an area. There's 10 shifts, and helping the team be more buoyant, be more joyful, be more connected, and owning that with each other. That's something that a lot of high intensity successful teams miss. So all teams can be better. So that's all I need to do is I need a leader to meet me with, I want my team to be better. And then the next step is, where within the practices would they start? Is it about hearing more truth and candor in the team? Some leaders don't like that. Some leaders are very conflict avoidant and don't even want to hear truth spoken in the room. It makes them uncomfortable.
Right.
Is it around deeper relationships among the team? Some leaders, they shy away from personal vulnerability or exposure of those kind of frailties of humanity. So I would say you start on the path where you're comfortable and where you believe you've got the lowest scores, because we give you a diagnostic to show you on a certain dimension of all these characteristics, where are you high, where are you low, what do you need to improve?
And when you start thinking about the organizations, and I love that like the curiosity, right? Like, hey, somebody that wants to be better. Like I always think of business as I'm a kind of like I'm an athlete, right? And it's
Exactly.
like I just athletic. I was an athlete in college, and I'm like, this is just my new form of athleticism. I got to
No,
go
and I
work.
always say, don't you want to be the best corporate athlete you can?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, that comes down to like being your own harshest critic and teaming and all the things we're talking about here, and like
Oh,
always
but just
wanting to
pause for
be
a second.
better.
Think about that. So you want to be a great athlete. Athletes have coaches,
Right.
but athletes also coach each other in the locker room. They coach each other in the huddle. The peer-to-peer coaching element is pretty significant. And so it's one of the most important things that we miss in business, that the team's got to be each other's coach. That's a big element of teamship. And it's usually missed. It's just left fallow. It's ignored as a possibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, how do you feel like if the team's got to be each other's coach? I think you're going to get varying degrees of people as far as their talent level of
Sure.
coaching. Some people have been coached, some people are naturally better leaders. How do you level that playing field to build a team of coaches who can coach each other well?
Same as everything else. We give you a simple practice. So there's a practice called an open 360 that we give people. And what you do is everybody goes around, and the first time they say, Darius, what I most respect about you as a member of this team is X. Boom, 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 boom. Everybody gives it to you. Positive. And then everybody goes around and says, Darius, because I care about your success, I might suggest. So it's the critical feedback. And everybody goes around and does that. Darius, you're not allowed to debate, and people aren't allowed to feel that just because they gave you the feedback that you have to take it. It's just data. So we lighten the pressure on this feedback by giving you the data, but giving you control of how you interpret that data.
Mm.
At the end of everybody going around, then you get to say, I've listened to all of you. Here's one thing I'm going to work on. Great, done. And then once a quarter, we do the exercise again. If you keep hearing the same feedback and you decide to ignore it and not make that your one thing, then maybe your boss will have something to say to you about that. But when peers are giving you feedback, they're just giving you data. And we want people to get used to and desirous of getting more data to be able to be better business people. So that's a simple practice. That what I learned about AA when I was studying AA is this is a program that has very clear rules of how people who are, some of them are cracked out of their minds, how do you behave and work together effectively as a team? And so we give the team rules so that somebody doesn't think they're an armchair shrink and starts, giving personal psychology advice to somebody and they have no qualification around it. So the practices that we delineate here are all very clean and clear in how they work together.
And when you say peers, does this work if there's a power dynamic that's not equal too?
It does, because to the extent that the team has a contract to co-elevate, it includes the leader. It also includes some of the members of the team that might own P&Ls where another one doesn't, or maybe somebody who's been in the organization for a long time. We want to equalize that and not allow the power dynamic to overshadow getting to the right answers, being bolder, pushing back. Yesterday, I just flew in from giving a talk to a bunch of CEOs of hospitals. And it was interesting because I'm telling them something that I thought perhaps would be new to them. And somebody came to me and they said, everything you talked about is absolutely needed for us to have healthcare reformed, reduce the costs of healthcare, et cetera. He said, but we've actually made traction on this in the operating rooms. Once you walk into the operating rooms, everybody has the right to have a voice if it's in service of the patient. So the lowest person in the ER has an equal voice to the surgeon when it comes to patient safety. So I thought that was very interesting that, in critical areas like your life and death situations, these practices are practiced in the military. Teamship is actually a fundamental of military success. Stanley McChrystal is a friend, and I've talked to him about this. And, he talks about team of teams. He talks about making sure that everybody's on the helicopter before the chopper takes off. We don't leave soldiers behind. All of these principles are critical principles for teamship.
So when you start to, it was funny when you were saying this, I was thinking like, this reminds me of really when you go back to Toyota, like the ability to pull the cord,
Yeah,
right, on the line.
100%.
Any employee can do that, right? So this is about empowering team members to challenge each other for the best outcomes, right? And then creating the mechanisms in order to get there. Am I understanding that properly?
Yeah, it's like I actually invented a practice because I saw this happening in one company. Maybe some of your listeners will know what a safe word is. I'm not going to ask them to tell me why, but a safe word in business is something we need. We need to have that euphemistic pulling of the cord to stop the line. Somebody needs to be able to say, I created a word, I called it a Yoda moment. Yoda is an all wise, all knowing character. And I believe that the wisdom of Yoda is in every team, but often doesn't get expressed. So when I'm coaching a team, anybody has the right to say, hey, Yoda moment, which means I'm about to take a risk. Don't shit all over me. What I'm about to say may be challenging. So the person says, Yoda moment, hey, I think that what Darius you've been saying totally is missing the point. Or Yoda moment, we haven't heard from Darius and we're talking about his area. We should be hearing from Darius. So everybody in the team has the ability to get the team righted in terms of how it's working. And we created a safe word to have everybody pause and give the person the time and respect to take a risk. So again, that's another practice, this idea of Yoda moments.
Have you? So it's funny you mentioned the military. I was talking. I've interviewed a lot of Navy SEALs. One particular Navy SEAL wrote a great book called "How Leadership Actually Works." I don't know if you've heard of that book by Larry Yatch, but he discusses this concept of teaming, right? And I know that's a big part of the Navy SEALs. So have you done much work with the military? Is this really fundamentally coming from a different place, or is that part of the work? I'd love to hear if your interactions with them at all.
Well, as a part of our work, we've studied the military, we've studied sports teams, and I believe that many of these organizations, we think of them as hierarchical or, ossified or challenging to move, but the agility is amazing. I actually went on an aircraft carrier as a part of this research, and to watch these kids scramble, as planes are taking off and taking on with billions of dollars of resources at their disposal, and these kids are kids. It's absolutely amazing how high performing team works. when you have clear practices, clear rules and regulations on, and clear social contracts, right? This is how we behave. This is what we agree. I used to have a ranger, James, who worked for me as my chief operating officer. And he would come in and he would come into my office, shut the door, and he would say, "Permission for candor, sir." Uh, and I knew that I was about to get double barrel feedback from him. That's his version of a safe word, you know, permission for candor, sir. I was like, oh shit, I'm about to get it.
And what would be an example of candor he would give you? Because I like the setup, but give me an example of like permission for candor, and they're just like, I'm going to tell you what's up.
Yeah, I mean, permission for candor, sir. Yep, go ahead, James. You fucked that meeting up so royally. You know, you shut everybody down. Nobody got a chance to talk. They've been working on this project. You shit all over. I mean, like, you know, he would beat
Like
me up,
like gloves off.
gloves off,
Oh, I love that.
gloves off.
And did you guys like, was that an agreement you had? Because you talked a little bit about agreements before this,
Yeah, I
or
mean, I call them social contracts. That's an agreement. Now, I didn't have to agree. I had to listen. It's data, you know? And I could say to him, all right, so, you know, the team had a clear remit. It totally missed the remit. What do you want me to do? You know, like I could have the debate, right? It's not, you know, but at the end of the day, I needed to have that fortitude, that courage to be able to be a better leader, to be able to get the data.
And so when you see that there's teams and there's people, there's conflict on the teams, or, you know, because what I find is, especially when you get a lot of A-type personalities in an organization, I'm experiencing this even myself a little bit right now because I have a startup, a private equity startup. There's a lot of really high level folks in here. You know, you got a lot of bulls in the china shop.
Yeah.
So sometimes people can step on each other's toes. I think it all comes from a place of good intent, but I do think that when you
sometimes it's from a place of self-service. You know, I remember one time I was coaching a team and there was this guy, he was saying, "Hey, I don't have a problem with candor." You know, he's like, "I'm Dutch or I'm Irish or whatever it is. I don't have a problem with candor." And after the first meeting, I was watching him interrupt people, shut people down, etc. And I said, "You know what? You're not about candor. You're just being an asshole."
Yeah.
I mean, that's not about candor, because here's the thing. When you give feedback to somebody, you should be working your butt off to make sure that it lands in a way that it will be executed. Because if you're a peer giving feedback to another peer, do you have the permission to give that feedback? We can all have a social contract that says we give each other feedback. Check the box. That's one level of permission. But does that person know that you care about them? Does that person know that you believe that you respect them? Right? That gives you another level of permission. And does that person know that your feedback is from a place of trying to do good for the mission? Or do they think it's coming from a perspective of self-service of yourself or protecting your turf? Like I said about Andy Jassy, are you a clean thinker? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're like hitting on the nail on the head though, which is, if there's not trust, right? Because they haven't established those checks, right? You got the list of things that you just said, and if I haven't shown you that I care and show you that I'm putting the company first, right? And so if those things don't exist, and I'm trying to be candid with you, it could land as like, this person's just trying to take power. This person's just trying to, you know, invoke their will. They just want to be perceived as higher status, right? And so like, I've seen this with in my organizations with the best of intention on my part as a CEO. And I'm like, man, they're like fighting like cats and dogs, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you, like, when you see those situations, how do you untangle those, because that seems like a kind of a tangled situation.
Is a great phrase. You don't think your way to new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of thinking. So when I come into a team and I see, I don't care what the behaviors have been. I'm about to put them through a set of drills that they'll learn a new set of practices that are a new way of working. So, you know, there's breakdowns in trust, people that don't like each other, people talking on top of each other, people shooting each other in the foot, talking behind each other's backs. That happens in all teams all the time. But I'm going to put a new set of practices that will eliminate that through repeated new ways of working. One of the things I do is a thing called a red flag replay. So, you read a chapter of the book. Okay, we're all going to be candid with each other. We're not going to talk behind each other's backs. Great. We have an inspirational story in here. A guy named Bill from Xfinity, CEO over there. Great. I believe and I can see what it does. We start doing the practice. We do a diagnostic test that says, here's where we are today. Now we start doing the practice and we see if we've gotten better. We've all had an agreement, a social contract around these red flags these rules that we're going to practice. Good. Now, every once in a while, I'll do a red flag replay. We'll have a meeting and I'll say, okay, in the last week, where have we violated our candor contract? Let's have a replay. Let's think about it. Where have we been lacking candor? Where have we been lacking courage? Where have you talked behind each other's backs? I want us to put that on the table. And because I've created that environment, people will raise their hand and be honest. I remember at that meeting that we did such and such, I left that meeting and I turned to David and I said, that was a shit show. I didn't say it in the room. I didn't stick my neck out to say it in the room. I said it after the fact. And we're like, great. Okay, let's have that conversation. How could you have done that differently? What was the moment like and why didn't you do it? And we replay. We do a replay on that moment so people can coach and learn from it.
I love that, man.
Just coaching new practices. It's so simple.
So, and man, I could talk to you for hours, Keith. I know that we're running out of time, and it sounds like the book is just a gift to the world of leaders who want to, learn these practices and go deeper on a lot of the stuff you're talking about. So I'm really excited for this November 12th date for Never Lead Alone, 10 shifts from leadership to teamship. I know you guys have a bunch of giveaways. I want to get to the greatness question, but why don't we let the audience know, where do they get the book? Where do they get the giveaways? Anything and everything that's in interest of supporting the book launch.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest place to find the book is keithferrazzi.com. keithferrazzi.com. Spelling, you can Google that. And the giveaway is, I really thought about, after I wrote the book, I put it in a bunch of people's hands, 100 people's hands. And I had them all give me feedback on where it was clear, where it was more difficult to execute, etc. And so I did a video series that describes each chapter and how to use it. So you read a chapter with your team, you all watch the video, you start using the practices, you go to the next chapter. And it's so simple and straightforward, almost like a workbook in that way. So we're giving away all of the videos for those of you who are buying the book for your whole team.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes. You guys go out there, check out buy the book for the teams, support the book launch for Keith, and we'll make sure that so if they just go to your website, they'll be able to get all the information there for those videos. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. All right. So we'll do all that. We'll make sure that ends up in the show notes. Keith, you ready for the greatness question?
Yes, sir. Go for it.
All right. What is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how have you overcome it?
So, I think you could call it insecurity, but it's second guessing. It's a sense of shame in terms of, am I good enough? Am I in the right room, etc. And earlier on, I've always been good at just pushing through, which is a way in which to overcome it. But the behavior, the practice of pushing through can get an outcome, but it doesn't give you less stress. It doesn't give you any sense of personal fulfillment. You're still a bundle of knots trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve with stress and anxiety and doubt. For me, it's been plant medicine. Plant medicine, for those of your guests who don't know what that means, there's a practice that indigenous Indians in Peru have found. It was called ayahuasca. And it's a potion that you drink, and it's an indigenous psychedelic, and it starts to rewire your brain and starts to allow you to tap back into old traumas and things that you maybe have not fully overcome in your life, fears, insecurities, traumas, etc. And when you come out, you have less attachment to those things and you let them go. As Marshall Goldsmith always says, let it go, let it go. And I would say that's that work, that hard work with that kind of medicine has been game-changing for me. Helped me fall in love. I just got engaged.
Nice. Congrats.
Had me get out of my own way to find the true self and a different and better path.
I love that, man. Keith, thank you so much for coming on The Greatness Machine. It's been an honor to have you. I'm so excited for the book launch. I'm really excited to read the new book, and good luck on it, and congratulations on everything. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darius. Cheers.
All right, everybody, go out there, support the book launch. Until next time, peace out. We love you.
She's my lover. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one. She's my lover.